With the Switch 2 launch just hours away, we're going from system to system counting down the best and worst games on Nintendo Classics app. To do this, we're using the average scores from Electronic Gaming Monthly, Nintendo Power, Edge, GamePro, Computer and Video Games, N-Force, and more classic magazines that reviewed these games back when they first came out. We've already looked at the top 49 Genesis games and the top 22 Game Boy Advance games. So now it's time to turn our attention to both the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color. First added to the Nintendo Switch Online back in February of 2023, Nintendo has added a total of 39 games to the service in the last 28 months. This includes a number of memorable platformers, more Mega Man games than you'll know what to do with, a few disappointing spin-offs, and even some fan-favorite Legend of Zelda games. Man, I sure hope you brought a Light Boy and a spare set of batteries, because you're gonna need them when I count down the top 39 Game Boy and Game Boy Color games on Nintendo Classics.
Who's got more toys than all the rest? Who's got the newest? Who's got the best? Got video games back to back. Got super low prices and that's a fact. Children's Palace, that's where it's at.
Get it while it's hot and get it while it's here. Game Boy, the power-packed, action-packed video game from Nintendo that you can easily get your hands on right now at Children's Palace.
Children's Palace, that's where it's at.
Kicking things off at number 39, it's Alleyway, one of the many games to be inspired by Atari's classic arcade hit Breakout. Alleyway was not a hit with the critics. Mean Machines called it boring, while Nintendo Magazine System gave it a 27% and complained that it was simplistic, tedious, and unchallenging, in that order. Number 38, Castlevania Legends. Despite being part of a much-loved franchise, the critics were not impressed with Castlevania Legends. They called it short, easy, and ultimately disappointing. The type of game you might play in preparation for the harder console titles like Dracula's Curse or Symphony of the Night. Number 37, Blaster Master, Enemy Below. After spending most of the 1990s hitting that snooze button, Blaster Master returned in the year 2000 with Enemy Below, a Game Boy Color installment that tried its hardest to recapture the glory of the 80s. Computer and Video Games gave it a 2 out of 5 and begged you to buy a better platform shooter. This game was a big disappointment. Number 36, Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare, a 2001 survival horror game that most magazines ignored due to it being on the Game Boy Color. Game Informer gave the game a 7.5 out of 10, appreciating its impressive design and ambition. However, Nintendo Power gave it a much lower score, complaining that it plays like a slideshow and our hero looks like Cornelius from Planet of the Apes. Number 35, Kirby's Star Stacker. Arguably Kirby's most ignored game, at least when it comes to the critics. Kirby's Star Stacker is yet another mascot-driven puzzler. Nintendo Power liked it, but complained that the higher difficulty is demented and that Kirby is just a figurehead. Number 34, Quest for Camelot. One of the very few games on the service to be based on a movie. In this case, Quest for Camelot is based on the Warner Bros. Cartoon that famously bombed at the box office. The critics gave it so-so scores, but are you really gonna play this over one of the many Legend of Zelda games on the platform? I think not. Number 33, Baseball. It may be bare bones, but it's also a completely serviceable baseball game. That is, assuming you don't care about licensing or realism or, depth, while you can still derive some fun from this no-frill sports game. Even at the time, critics felt that the Game Boy launch title was a relic from the past. Number 32, Dr. Mario. While a generation of gamers may view this as an all-time classic, the critics were divided on Dr. Mario. Some complained that it was a worse version of Tetris, while others openly wondered if basing a game around pharmaceuticals might send the wrong message to children. Number 31, Gargoyle's Quest. This Ghosts and Goblins spin-off was a big hit with me as a kid, but apparently the critics disagreed, giving it an average score of 72%. Ace liked the spooky visuals and atmosphere, while GameZone called it an unfriendly platformer, whatever that means. Number 30, Mario's Picross. Likely the most polarizing Game Boy game on the Nintendo Classics app. These Mario Picross reviews are all over the place. EGM's own fake ninja, Sushi X, gave it a 4 out of 10, calling it educational and bland to play, while Computer and Video Games gave it a 96%, raving that it's the most addictive game of the year. Number 29, Donkey Kong Land 2. When the original Donkey Kong Land was released in 1995, the critics were impressed by both the performance and the ambition of this brand new platformer. Unfortunately, that enthusiasm did not translate to the 1996 sequel, which split the critics into two different camps. Those who loved it, and those who were annoyed that it was essentially the same game as Donkey Kong Country 2 on the Super NES. Number 28, Kirby's Tilt and Tumble. An early attempt by Nintendo to cram motion controls into games that went about as well as you would expect. Kirby's Tilt and Tumble tries to make accelerometers fun, but the critics found the imprecise control to be far more frustrating. EGM yearned for an option that would let you play with the regular buttons, and complained that tilting the game also tilts the screen, making it hard to see what's going on. Number 27, Mega Man 5. Now, you may look back fondly at Mega Man 5 as the one game in the Game Boy series that actually shook things up, but the critics, well, they didn't seem to notice that back when the game first came out. With relatively low scores, the critics liked the action and the Super Game Boy support, but were down on the game for just being more of the same. I think you can chalk this one up to Mega Man fatigue.
The adult world is designed to keep us moving, and while this may make us more efficient, it's not exactly a party. Luckily, technology has produced a cure. It's called a Game Boy, the personal game-playing system from Nintendo, with lots of sports, action, and puzzle games to choose from. And it comes with the puzzle game Tetris. It could change your outlook.
I'm sorry, sir. Your flight's been delayed.
Cool.
Game Boy by Nintendo. Have you had your fun today?
And we're back with number 26, Game & Watch Gallery 3. Skipping right over the first two installments, Game & Watch Gallery 3 features 5 classic portable games, including heavy hitters like Donkey Kong Jr. and Mario Bros. Most critics like the trip back to the early days of portable gaming, even if the games themselves are a bit on the simple side. It's Nintendo Power's surprisingly low score that drags the overall average down a bit. Number 25, Kirby's Dream Land 2. Released 3 years after the 1992 original, Kirby's Dream Land 2 builds on its predecessor with new gameplay mechanics and vastly improved graphics. Many critics argued that it isn't in the same league as Nintendo's other platformers, with many complaining about the easy difficulty. Number 24, Gradius, the Interstellar Assault. It's a handheld spin-off of Konami's popular shoot-'em-up series. While some critics liked the attempt to bring the fast-paced combat to the Game Boy, many complained that the screen is too slow to keep up, the action is a blurry mess, and it's sometimes impossible to know what's going on. Oh, and it's also short. Number 23, BurgerTime Deluxe. This is an updated version of the arcade smash hit from Data East. Though a bit long in the tooth by the time it hit the Game Boy, the critics praised BurgerTime Deluxe for expanding on the original's level designs. That said, Nintendo Power couldn't get past the challenging difficulty, while Nintendo Magazine System called it repetitive. Number 22, Mega Man 3. Mega Man is not only one of the Game Boy's most prolific franchises, but it's also one of the most consistent. Although this third installment is really just more of the same, the critics continue to be into the black and white adventures of the Blue Bomber. Still, there were signs that the third game in the series might be running out of steam. Number 21, The Sword of Hope. One of the earliest role-playing games to hit the Game Boy. The Sword of Hope takes what people liked about the Kemco Sega point-and-click adventure games and mixed it with a whole bunch of turn-based combat. This is a fantastic game that's really only marred by critics who were not sure what to make of it at the time. Number 20, Pokemon Trading Card Game. While Nintendo refuses to port any of the classic Pokemon games that got their start on the Game Boy, at least we get the Pokemon Trading Card Game, right? While it's definitely not for everybody, longtime fans of the card game will feel right at home and have an endless amount of computer opponents to go up against. You know, if that's your thing. Number 19, Donkey Kong Land 3. Coming out of nowhere, the Donkey Kong Land trilogy helped to keep the Game Boy going for a few extra years. While the critics liked the third installment more than the previous game, some were a little frustrated that it is, yet again, more of the same. What elevated the platformer was its technical achievement, pulling off animation previously unheard of on the aging hardware. Number 18, Super Mario Land. While certainly not on the same level as his console adventures, Mario's first foray onto the handheld isn't half bad. It's full of fresh ideas and unique gameplay, with some levels actually turning the 2D platformer into a shoot-'em-up. The critics were into the variety, but complained about the short length. Number 17, Mega Man 4. Releasing 4 Mega Man games in just 2 years, Capcom sure was in a hurry to strike while the iron was hot. Or maybe they assumed that the system would peter out in a few years, like most consoles. Either way, here we are with yet more levels pulled directly from the Nintendo Entertainment System games. The critics still liked the formula, though slightly preferred the first 2 games in the series. Number 16, Mega Man 2. Yet another great entry in the long-running Mega Man franchise. Coming just a few months after Dr. Wily's Revenge, Mega Man 2 feels more like an expansion pack than a true sequel. Still, we get another batch of levels pulled straight out of the Nintendo Entertainment System games. The critics were genuinely impressed with how close to the NES game this port comes, arguing that the only thing it lacks is the color. Number 15, Mega Man, Dr. Wily's Revenge. Although it's more of a greatest hits package than a full-on new game, Dr. Wily's Revenge was the first of many Mega Man games to hit the Game Boy in the 1990s. The critics were especially impressed with the big character sprites, the accurate stage design, and the attention to detail. Sure, a lot of concessions had to be made to fit it onto the handheld, but this Mega Man game is still a lot of fun. Number 14, Kirby's Dream Land. One of the very few long-running Nintendo franchises to get its start on the Game Boy, Kirby's Dream Land introduced the world to everybody's favorite Super Sucker, but longtime fans may be a bit surprised to find out that not all of his iconic moves were there from the very start. The critics praised the charming visuals and accessible gameplay, but found the game to be a bit on the easy side.
Be afraid. Be very afraid. One life-sucking Metroid survived the first Metroid adventure, and it's multiplying rapidly. You must help Samus save the universe again in Metroid II. So we're giving you more power and mightier weapons to search a bigger world where hundreds of strange enemy life forms lurk. Destroy or be destroyed.
Metroid II, The Return of Samus, only on Game Boy.
The future is in your hands.
And we're back with number 13, Wario Land 3. Yes, it is weird that Nintendo decided to release both Wario Land 3 and 4 on Nintendo Classics, but apparently not the first 2 games. That said, don't sleep on this excellent platformer because it's one of the best games on the Game Boy Color. Nintendo Power even argued that the game sets a new standard for the handheld, while EGM called it a reminder of why we fell in love with video games in the first place. Number 12, Donkey Kong Land. Released at a time when everybody's attention was distracted by new 32-bit hardware, Donkey Kong Land was a brand new platformer that was developed specifically for the original Game Boy. The critics were impressed that the game kept the trappings of the Super NES game without having to compromise too much of the action. Number 11, Donkey Kong 94. More than just a port of an arcade game, Donkey Kong 94 contains one of gaming's greatest twists. What starts out as a fairly traditional version of Donkey Kong quickly turns into something fresh and exciting. The critics loved the surprise, raving about the treasure trove of content and how good it looks on the Super Game Boy. Everybody was just happy that after a decade-long hiatus, Kong was finally back to reclaim his throne. Number 10, Survival Kids. One of the most exciting and rarest games to hit the Nintendo Classics app. Survival Kids is a mix of Legend of Zelda and Lord of the Flies. And while there weren't a whole lot of reviews back in 1999, those that actually played it ended up having a great time. Computer and video games called it totally original and totally great, and I agree. Number 9, Super Mario Land 2 6 Golden Coins. Released 3 years after the first Super Mario Land, 6 Golden Coins showed just how far the developers had come in learning how to get the most out of the limited handheld hardware. It's also much more of a traditional Mario game, ditching a lot of the weirder elements that made the first game so unique. The critics prefer this trip to Mario Land, suggesting that you're going to want to play it over and over and over again. Number 8, Mario Golf. This is a surprisingly big and sprawling golf game in the style of NES Open Tournament Golf, complete with Mario-centric courses and hazards. The critics called this a must-buy, even if you're not a big fan of the sport. Both Game Informer and Nintendo Power praised the amount of content that you'll find in what could have been a very simple Game Boy game. Number 7, Mario Tennis. Donkey Kong 94 isn't the only Game Boy game full of surprises, because Mario Tennis gives players a fun and surprisingly robust role-playing game that's full of bad guys to take on and new worlds to conquer. The critics were a little confused, though a few of the naysayers complained about the repetitive gameplay, the questionable controls, and the baffling adventure mode. Number 6, Tetris DX. Added to the service to coincide with the release of the wonderful Tetris Forever compilation, Tetris DX is the best version of the classic puzzler on the Game Boy. Forget the added color, the real star here is the ability to save your high scores. It didn't really offer much new in the form of content, but the critics didn't care. They were just happy to experience Tetris on the Game Boy Color. Number 5, Metroid II Return of Samus. The Game Boy follow-up to the 1987 Nintendo Entertainment System game, Metroid II sees Nintendo experimenting with the formula, trying to figure out where the franchise would go next. The critics liked the graphics and the adventure, with Entertainment Weekly going as far as to give the side-scroller an A+. Number 4, Tetris. Even though Tetris was 5 years old by the time it hit the Game Boy, that black and white version was many Americans' first experience with the Russian puzzle game. Some may be surprised that magazines like Electronic Gaming Monthly gave the game 7s when it first came out, just completely unaware of the lasting power and the influence that Tetris would have on the world. Number 3, The Legend of Zelda Oracle of Ages. Coming out just months before the launch of the Game Boy Advance, Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons felt like Nintendo and Capcom giving the aging 8-bit hardware a final hurrah. It doesn't really matter the order you place Ages and Seasons because they both earned the same scores from the same critics. More than just a great Zelda game, Oracle of Ages was a celebration of what good developers were able to pull off on the Game Boy Color. Number 2, The Legend of Zelda Oracle of Seasons. The Game Boy Color swan song is also one of its best games. Once again, it really doesn't matter how you rank these two games because they both earned the same 92%. The critics were just in awe at what the developers were able to pull off here. The detailed dungeons, the inventive puzzles, the epic adventure, and of course the cool items that kept you glued to not just one Oracle game, but 2! This is how you say goodbye to a system. And finally, in number 1, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening DX. That's right, it's another Nintendo classic countdown where The Legend of Zelda sits at the top of the pile. You might just want to get used to that because it's going to be a trend. In this case, it's the color re-release of Link's Awakening, an enhanced version made specifically for the Game Boy Color. The critics loved this new adventure game, praising it for retaining pretty much everything that people loved about the console games. all while never feeling like it was being hampered by the portable hardware. A strong story, great bosses, and fun adventure make Link's Awakening DX the best reviewed Game Boy game on Nintendo Classics.
The place.
Definitely.
If you're into Nintendo games,
And who isn't?
then get into Walmart.
We're talking serious Nintendo game store.
Because the only thing
Hotter than Nintendo games,
Is Walmart's price.
the Game Boy system is $89.97 every day, and Radar Mission for Game Boy is just $19.67.
incredible.
Turtles Follow the Foot plan is just $26.38. The only thing hotter than Nintendo games is Walmart's price.
Walmart, my allowance, thanks you.
Walmart.
Yes!
Always.
Hey, thanks for watching me count down these classic games. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we're going through all the systems on the Nintendo Switch Online. We've already hit the Game Boy Advance, the Genesis, and now the Game Boy and Game Boy Color. And that's not all, because soon we're going to be checking in with the Nintendo 64, the Super NES, and of course the Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, here's the question I have for you. What's your favorite Game Boy game? Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we're going to be back later this week with a new Review Crew episode. Wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.